Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining us today. We got an intense and emotional story to share with you, so sit tight and let's dive in. My name is Logan, and if there's one hard truth I've learned, it's that problems in a marriage don't appear out of nowhere. They creep in slowly, disguised as small inconveniences, easy to dismiss at first. That's the mistake many people, including myself, make. We tell ourselves it's nothing, but those little things, if you ignore them long enough, they grow into something much bigger. Felicia and I had been married for a few years, and in the beginning, things were good. Not perfect, because no marriage is, but we had a solid rhythm. If you had asked me back then, I would have confidently said we were strong. But now, looking back, I realize that cracks don't always start with a dramatic break. Sometimes, they're just small shifts in behavior, the kind that don't seem alarming until they become a pattern. Felicia's schedule began changing in ways that didn't make sense. At first, it was subtle, coming home late on Fridays, which didn't seem like a big deal. Work runs late sometimes, right? But then it became a habit. Every Friday, she had a reason, an unexpected meeting, helping a friend, some last-minute work issue. If she didn't work late on Friday, then suddenly, Saturday was booked, brunch with a friend, an errand, or just needing me time. I wanted to be understanding. People get busy. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Fridays and Saturdays. Those were the days she was always gone. And when she was home, things weren't the same. The first red flag? Her phone. Felicia used to leave her phone lying around without a second thought. If it buzzed while she was in another room, she casually asked me to check who it was. But then that changed. Suddenly, her phone was always in her hand, and if I walked by, she'd tilt the screen away or lock it instantly. One day, I picked it up just to check the time, and for the first time ever, it demanded a passcode. I asked her about it, and she laughed, brushing it off with something about being more security conscious. Alone, these things might not have meant much, but together, they painted a very different picture. I told myself I wouldn't jump to conclusions. I needed to see for myself. One night, Felicia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair, touching up her makeup. She said she was meeting a friend. I nodded like I always did, but deep down, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit at home wondering. I was going to follow her. She grabbed her purse, gave me a quick smile, and walked out the door. I waited exactly 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. I kept my distance, making sure she wouldn't notice, but close enough that I wouldn't lose her. But she wasn't heading toward the area where her friends lived. Instead, she took a different route, one that led to a nearly empty stretch of town, where businesses had already closed for the night. I followed, my grip tightening on the wheel, my heart pounding. She pulled into a dimly lit parking lot behind a strip of buildings. She didn't get out right away. Instead, she checked her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. Her fingers moved quickly, typing something. Then, another car pulled in, a black sedan. It parked right beside her, and before I could even process what was happening, she opened her door and slid into the passenger seat of the other car. My stomach dropped. I had spent so much time convincing myself that I was overthinking, that I needed to stop being paranoid. But now, what possible innocent reason could she have for meeting another man in a dark parking lot at night? I took a deep breath. This was it. But I didn't react right away. I just watched. After a few minutes, I made my move. I opened my door, stepped out, and walked toward the car. My heart was hammering in my chest, but my steps were steady, my mind clear. I knocked on the window. The reaction was immediate. Felicia's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with shock. It was the kind of look people give when they know they've been caught and have no way out. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. The man beside her? I knew him. He wasn't some stranger. He was her co-worker. A man I had met before. Someone married. Someone who talked about his family. Not the kind of man you'd suspect. And yet, here he was, sitting in a car with my wife, looking like he'd seen a ghost. I let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. So this is what girls' night looks like. My voice was calm. Not loud, not angry, just steady. Felicia stammered. Logan, this isn't... She stopped. Even she knew there was no way to spin this into something innocent. I looked at her, then at him. Finally, I exhaled and said, "Meet me at home when you're done." That's all. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't need to say more. I had already seen everything I needed to. The drive home was silent. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind raced. My gut told me everything I needed to know, but there was one thing that frustrated me more than anything. I didn't have proof. Think about it. I hadn't taken pictures. I hadn't recorded anything. All I had was the image of my wife sitting in another man's car in a dimly lit parking lot. If I confronted her further, what was stopping her from twisting the story? She could say I was overreacting. She could deny everything. And technically she could get away with it, because I hadn't caught them kissing. I hadn't overheard anything incriminating. It was my word against hers. That realization sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't stupid. I knew what I saw. But knowing something and proving it, those were two different things. If I accuse her now, she could turn it back on me. Make me look like the paranoid husband. Hell, she might even cry. Call me controlling. Say I was suffocating her, that I didn't trust her. And the worst part? Without hard evidence, some people might actually believe her. I exhaled sharply, staring at the road ahead. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about making sure she couldn't lie her way out of it. I needed something undeniable. I needed her to admit it herself. When Felicia walked through the door later that night, her face was already streaked with tears. She didn't even wait to take off her shoes before the begging started. Her voice cracked as she called my name, her words tumbling over each other in desperate apologies. "Logan, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. But I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching her. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She needed to feel the weight of her own actions, to sit in the silence and let it crush her. She kept looking at me, waiting for me to yell, to demand answers, to give her something to work with. When I didn't, she took a hesitant step closer, her sobs growing louder. "Logan, please," she whispered, her voice raw. "Say something." And that's when I finally spoke. But I didn't ask her why she did it. I didn't ask her to explain herself. I just said one thing. "Unlock your phone and give it to me." She froze, just for a second. But that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It didn't matter what she said after that. No excuse, no justification would mean more than that single pause. She knew it, and I knew it. Her hands trembled as she looked down her phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" I didn't repeat myself. I didn't need to. Instead, I squared my shoulders and gave her a look that told her this wasn't a request. It was an order, and she understood. With shaky fingers, she swiped across the screen, entered her passcode, and held the phone out to me. I took it without a word. I already knew what I would find, but now I needed the proof. She watched as I scrolled through her messages. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But I wasn't stupid. I knew they wouldn't make it that easy to find. So I dug deeper. And then there was a conversation hidden under an emoji. I opened it, and the truth was right there in black and white. I started reading the messages out loud, my voice steady, my hands firm as I held the phone. And with every word, Felicia broke down a little more. They had been careful. No obvious declarations of love, no explicit confessions, nothing that would immediately scream affair to an outsider. But I wasn't an outsider. The messages spoke of missing each other on weekends, of how hard it was to pretend around others. The deeper I scrolled, the less they bothered to hide it. They spoke in code, sometimes, but it wasn't hard to figure out. They reminisced about hotel meetups, planned work dinners that had nothing to do with work, and exchanged messages late at night, long after any professional reason to be talking should have ended. But the worst part? The way they talked about me. Messages about how she had to be careful, about how she hated lying, but had no choice, about how they needed to be smarter, so no one would suspect. I kept reading, my voice even, as Felicia crumbled in front of me. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. I took a deep breath, staring at her as she sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing. The room was silent, except for the sound of her regret. And then, I asked the only question that mattered. Was I not enough for you? It was simple, direct, but she didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. She just kept crying. I had given her everything, and in return, she had given me lies. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had been broken. And then I made my decision. There's no fixing this. I said finally, my voice calm. You're going to pack your things and leave. Her head snapped up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with panic. Please, Logan, she whispered. Just give me time. Let's talk about this. I shook my head. No, there's nothing to talk about. Time wouldn't change what she had done. Time wouldn't bring back the trust she had shattered. I can't trust you anymore, Felicia, I said, my voice steady. This marriage is over. She sobbed harder, but I didn't waver. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. The next day, she packed her things and left. No drawn-out fights. No second chances. Just a clean break. She walked out of the house we had built together, and I let her go. 2 weeks passed, and the divorce papers were ready. I remember holding them in my hands, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I wanted this marriage to end. Not because I enjoyed walking away from something we had built, but because I knew I couldn't stay with someone who had already left me emotionally long before I caught her. Felicia must have sensed that I was serious because, before I could finalize everything, she tried one last time to talk me out of it. She showed up at my place. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was desperate. Logan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We've been through so much together. She talked about our memories, about the good times, about how we had promised to always work through things. We should fix this instead of throwing it all away, she pleaded. I just sat there and listened, not because I was considering it, but because I wanted to hear what excuse she could possibly come up with to justify what she had done. When she was done, I said, you should have thought of that when you started giving another man your attention. After that, she didn't try to convince me anymore. Instead, she went out and told people that we broke up because we were not compatible. I almost laughed when I heard it. Not compatible? We had been married for years. But now, suddenly we weren't compatible? It was easier for her to say that than to admit the truth. But I didn't care. I had the truth, and that was enough for me. Looking back, I've learned a lot from this experience. And if there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this: patterns matter. People don't just wake up one day and decide to cheat. It starts with small, consistent changes in their behavior. These little things, when ignored, turn into bigger problems. If someone is acting differently for no clear reason, it's worth paying attention to. Another lesson? Never ignore red flags. I monitored her behavior for months. I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But trust isn't about ignoring reality. It's about seeing things clearly and deciding whether someone deserves it. And most importantly, always have evidence before acting. If I had confronted Felicia that night with nothing but my anger, she could have lied her way out of it. She could have twisted the story, denied everything, and made me look like a jealous husband who jumped to conclusions. But with her phone in my hands, there was no debate. The messages spoke for themselves. And that brings me to one last harsh truth. Some people will rewrite history to avoid looking bad. Even after everything, Felicia didn't tell people the truth about why our marriage ended. Instead, she told them we just weren't compatible. That's how it goes. A lot of cheaters don't want to be seen as cheaters. They'll twist the story to make themselves look better. But I don't care. Let her tell whatever version of the story makes her feel better. The truth is the truth, whether she admits it or not. Now, some of you might wonder, why didn't I go after revenge? Why didn't I expose her? Why didn't I ruin her reputation the way she ruined our marriage? The answer is simple. Revenge isn't necessary. I let her go, and that was enough. At the end of the day, if she didn't want me, she should be with whoever she wants. I won't hold on to someone who doesn't value me. That's not losing. That's freeing myself from a lie. But that's just my perspective. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation like this? What would you have done differently? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one.